Good morning, church. Have you ever seen a miracle with your own eyes, one that happened right in front of you? I've known several people who have been miraculously healed. A man who was deaf in one ear, who was actually missing the bones in his inner ear, whose hearing was restored after receiving prayer. A young girl with a degenerative disease in her hip who was healed when an evangelist prayed for her at a crusade. She went on to be quite an athlete and a children's minister. And a young woman who was healed of epilepsy and became a missionary. I saw the evidence of them being healed, and I knew that it was real, but I didn't see it happen right in front of me. I've also personally experienced numerous examples of God's amazing protection and provision, including several which seem to me to be miraculous, though I can't prove that to be the case. I recall a time driving on the old two-lane highway between Lawrence and Ottawa when my car hit black ice, did a complete 360-degree spin, and stayed on the highway. I was shook up, but unhurt. Then there was a time in my freshman year of college when a group of us were playing some sort of game just across the street from Allen Fieldhouse. At that time, there was a softball field there. It was just outside the old Robinson gym. We stopped playing because it was getting dark, and I realized that I'd lost my wallet during the game. So everyone helped me look for it in the grass, and we searched for a while, but the light was quickly fading, and we couldn't find it anywhere. Someone suggested that we ask for God to help us. So we huddled up in a circle, and we prayed, and when we finished, I looked down at the ground, and my wallet was right there by my feet. These are just two examples of several that I could mention, and to me, they're clearly instances where God intervened to provide help for me, perhaps even through the agency of some angels. But God's providential care and His provision for us and His actions that are answers to our prayers are not necessarily the same thing as a miracle, even when they're quite astounding to us or striking in their timeliness. We have to be careful when we talk about miracles. Today, we use the word miracle in lots of ways that completely distort its meaning, even strip it of its actual meaning altogether. For instance, Jayhawk fans love to talk about Mario's miracle, the shot that sent the 2008 National Championship game into overtime where KU prevailed over the favored Memphis Tigers. It was a fantastic shot. I still remember where I was when he hit it. But it wasn't a miracle. It was simply the culmination of a remarkable comeback that resulted in the Jayhawks winning the championship. And similar remarkable shots happen several times a week throughout the basketball season every year. And the same is true for the U.S. men's hockey's team victory over the USSR in the 1980 Olympics. It was shocking, it was unexpected, statistically improbable. The only reason we think of that victory as a miracle is because of Al Michaels' brilliant call on the broadcast, "Do you believe in miracles?" The U.S. won that day because of some phenomenal coaching and inspired play by a great hockey team, not because God intervened in a way that shifted ordinary reality so that the U.S. could claim a victory over their rivals and enemies. I remember a time when I had preached a sermon that included a part about miracles. And afterwards, a family doctor who had delivered plenty of babies told me, every birth is a miracle. I was really grateful that this physician, who'd seen hundreds of births, saw giving birth as something that was wonderful and inspiring. And even though he was an expert in the medical field, he was still a man, therefore in awe of what women were capable of doing, not to mention being in awe of the whole process itself, and rightfully so. But the birth of a baby is not a miracle. It's the opposite of a miracle. It's a very normal and natural, ordinary part of life in this world. Every minute of every day sees more than 250 babies born. It's still wonderful, it's still awe-inspiring, it's just not a miracle. When we see God's hand in creation, babies or sunsets or the beauty of nature, all the amazing and glorious reflections of His creative ability. We rightly recognize the splendor of God's person, His presence through what He has made. We appreciate what we see for the glimpse that it gives us of who God is. He's the designer behind the design, the artist behind the artistry, the mind behind the order, the one who holds it all together. We see the power of God displayed through all of what He has made. We just sang about it. And all of that points to the singular miracle of the event of creation, in which the laws that govern our universe were infused into the creation itself. But that's different from what we now term a miracle, where His power is displayed in a different way. When God works a miracle, He inserts Himself into the events of this world to demonstrate both His divine power and His divine purpose by acting in a way that overrides the laws of the universe. Sometimes that involves accelerating or limiting or suspending natural processes. Other times, God simply goes beyond anything that is part of the natural functioning of this universe. And the problem is that we have watered down the meaning of the word miracle. We use it to refer to experiences that may be wonderful or amazing to us, but they're simply unusual or perhaps just especially important for us. But by doing so, we can then easily slip into a posture that abandons the biblical teaching and substitutes our own understanding for God's wisdom. And we've seen this in the history of the church, most keenly in the past 200 years, with the increase in scientific knowledge. Because scientific reasoning could explain what used to be inexplicable, those with knowledge could demonstrate how the universe and its laws function, eliminating much of the mystery that once dominated our understanding. That knowledge enabled humans to accomplish what was once believed to be impossible, brought a lot of good to our advancing societies. But that knowledge also brought with it an unbridled skepticism. And for many, the Bible became a preposterous book filled with absurdities. The narration of miracles in its pages was seen as the evidence that it was nothing more than the record of an unenlightened age, when people believed stories that were clearly impossible, something that modern educated people should dismiss as silly and useless. So those who still saw a value in the morals and the ethical teaching of the Bible held on to the name of Christianity, redefined it in terms of advancing human society or fostering personal improvement. And those who didn't care for what the Bible valued simply dismissed Christianity and its moral teaching altogether. Entire Christian denominations abandoned Christian beliefs and put in their place generalized religious ideas that could claim the support of whatever philosophical trends or academic views were currently in favor. And what was the case on the macro level was also the case on the micro level. Many people who once pledged their allegiance to Jesus and to His Word came to regard the Scriptures with suspicion and think of Jesus as merely as a nice guy who taught people to love others instead of hating them. And if they consider the Bible at all, it's only for the pieces they can extract and redefine along whatever lines support their own personal views. There are a lot of problems with taking that view of the Bible and of Christian faith, not least of which is what we see in the fruit that comes from pursuing that path. And we're seeing it again widely in our day. I'm not going to spend any time addressing all of that today, except I do want to say that if you have honest questions about how to reconcile faith and what the Bible teaches and scientific reasoning or similar questions, I'll be happy to sit down with you, have a conversation, or I can offer you some resources where you can explore those questions with experts who are better able to help you with specific questions on technical matters. What I do want to point out today is that if we're going to follow Jesus, we cannot simply sidestep or ignore the miraculous elements in the Bible. They are everywhere. And as our passage from Matthew 8 demonstrates, quite often the miraculous is at the very heart of the matter. We can't understand the passage if we don't understand what is happening with the miracle that it describes. Now, I'm not sure why, but But I've never doubted the reality of miracles in the Bible, even when I had doubts about a lot of other things. Some miracles baffled me, still do sometimes. But from a very early age, I figured that if God exists, then miracles were possible. They might not be common. I might not have seen one in person. But it never occurred to me to think that they were impossible. As a youth, I began hearing people in the church I grew up in trying to explain Jesus' miracles as something else, that he had advanced medical knowledge beyond what others knew at the time, or some such thing. And they would have described this message in Matthew as being a case where Jesus was able to calm his disciples who were overreacting to a little squall which he knew wasn't really a danger to them. Such attempts to explain away the miracle weren't persuasive. Still aren't. And then when I was in seminary, I read famous scholars who dismissed the miraculous accounts as just ignorant speculation. And they insisted that what we had to do to have a genuine faith was to read the language of the New Testament through the lens of current psychological or philosophical insights as a way to rescue the text from these ridiculous notions involving miracles. Again, I wasn't persuaded. I remain unpersuaded. In fact, these modern skeptics who thought of the people of the first century as ignorant seemed quite ignorant themselves. They blindly missed what is a fairly obvious truth, which is that people in the first century were not stupid. People living in Jesus' day knew the difference between ordinary life and something supernatural. They were skeptical when someone told them something that contradicted what they knew to be normal. They knew that blind people didn't suddenly gain the ability to see on their own, or that lepers could be instantly cleansed, or that dead people could come back to life. Telling them that these things had happened wouldn't persuade someone without strong evidence to the contrary. So, let's pretend that we could take the people in our story today, the ones who were in the boat with Jesus, put them in a different setting in their own world. Let's put them all together in a meeting in a small city in Galilee about 20 years later. And let's imagine that they're there among this group of people they mostly don't know, some of whom are followers of Jesus, others are not. And then someone asks the entire group the question I asked you at the start of this message. Have you ever seen a miracle with your own eyes, one that happened right in front of you? 12 or so hands would have instantly shot up. 12 or so heads started nodding. Oh yes, I was there in the boat when it happened. It's a day I will never forget. Let's talk through what happened to those men in that boat. Jesus had been ministering to a large crowd of people near Capernaum on the shore of Lake Galilee. It's sometimes known as the Sea of Galilee. And as usual, he was teaching them, but also healing many people. And the 12 disciples have become quite accustomed to this pattern, even though they still marvel. Jesus is amazing. He has the power of God to heal, and no disease or injury is beyond his power. Toward the end of the day, then, Jesus gives them instructions. Secure a boat, secure the use of a boat. We need to take it to the opposite shore on the east, because Jesus intends to go to the area of the Decapolis, a region where the majority of the population is Gentile. So the disciples do that. Jesus leaves the crowd, gets on board the ship with his disciples, and promptly goes to sleep, exhausted from the day's ministry. Now, Lake Galilee is notorious for having sudden, strong squalls. The lake sits at about 600 feet below sea level, and winds from the plateau on the southeast bring warm air, collides with the cooler air over the lake, which produces the moisture, and that produces storms that can be quite violent. That's my layman's explanation. If you really want the technical deals, talk to our former professor of meteorology, Donna, and she'll fill you in on the better part. Now, among the men in the boat, at least 4 are experienced fishermen, seasoned sailors, very familiar with the lake, very much at home in a boat. But this storm takes even them by surprise. The waves are crashing over the sides of the small fishing boat, tipping them up and down, side to side, Everyone's gripping the rails, struggling with the oars, desperately clinging on to avoid being tossed overboard. And the ferocity of the storm is threatening to capsize the vessel and send them all to a watery grave. Jesus is asleep through it all. The disciples, on the other hand, are terrified, especially those who are not fishermen, like Matthew himself. And they are desperate. They wake Jesus, cry out to him to save them, lest they drown. Here's where it gets pretty interesting. We don't know what the disciples expected him to do. From the way they reacted to what he did do, it doesn't look like they were expecting him to calm the storm. It appears that they were expecting him to grab an oar or grab the rudder or help them steady the boat. But they did cry out to him. They did ask him to save them. So they must have been expecting something from him, some display of the power of God that could help them survive this terrible storm. They had seen him do astounding miracles of healing. Now they were in need of a dramatic rescue. Could he save them? Jesus wakes up. He hears their cries. But instead of grabbing an oar or the rudder, he rebukes them for their little faith. He doesn't chide them for overreacting as if the storm wasn't real or if the storm wasn't really a danger. The storm was absolutely real, and it was a genuine threat to their safety. So why then does he rebuke them for their little faith? And the word refers more to the quality of their faith than the amount of it. They have a poor faith, a faith that's weak, easily overwhelmed by fears. Well, the reason Jesus rebuked them is because he's already given them enough to support their faith. They'd seen the miracles. They'd heard him teach about how God would provide for them. And they'd heard him tell them that he was going to the other side of the lake. When he told them to secure the boat for the journey across the lake, he was not making idle suggestions on how they might spend the next few hours. He was telling them where God was sending them all. And their little faith was lacking precisely because they did not grasp that his word was certain, dependable, that it gave them all that they needed to hold on to, no matter what was happening around them. Jesus was sleeping through the storm, not just because he was exhausted and not because the storm wasn't real, but because he had a place to be on the other side of the lake where he had work to do that the Father had sent him to do. He trusted his entire life to the Father, and he had given that same word to the disciples, expecting them to trust it as well. If the Father had sent the Son across the lake and the Son was in their boat, they were safe in the midst of the storm, even if it took all their strength to stay afloat. That storm wasn't going to take down the Son of God. Now, one of the things I love most about this story is what happens next. Because Jesus doesn't stop after he rebukes the disciples. He doesn't tell them to leave him alone. He doesn't tell them, look, you need to trust God more. He doesn't tell them how disappointed he is in them for failing to believe his word. Now, he gets up and he rebukes the wind and the waves as if the elements of the storm were the ones who were disobedient. He speaks a word, the wind stops, the waves stop, the storm dissipates into nothing. It's calm. Jesus may have been disappointed in the disciples for their lack of faith, but he responded to their cries for help. He saved them from the storm that was threatening to overwhelm them. He didn't punish them for not being what they should have been. He rescued them despite their little faith. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, I would dearly love to see a huge reduction in our use of the word should. It's not a bad word. It's a very important word, a very good word. It's a word that reminds us that God has commands, that God has requirements, that there are moral and ethical and spiritual obligations for anyone who wants to live in God's kingdom. But we use the word far too often, and we use it wrongly. We use it to say what we know we ought to do, but have no intention of doing. I know I should. We use it to say that, and that's just sinful self-justification parading as phony future obedience. But even more often, we use it to beat ourselves up when we're caught in something that's stronger than we are. I know I should be able to. I should be more. I can't, and I'm not, and I just feel horrible about myself. Listen, if you think that you should be able to do something that you aren't able to do, that's either false guilt or faulty self-evaluation. You think you're guilty because there's something you imagine you should be able to do, but the reality is that you're not in a position to be able to do whatever that is, and the guilt you're feeling isn't real. It's an accusation from the enemy or from someone who doesn't know what's real, or from your own mind, which is warped by your own past failures. Or you have a very flawed view of what you actually are capable of doing. You imagine that there's this version of you that's different from who you are. Someone who's more mature, stronger, smarter, more spiritual, less prone to whatever it is that trips you up. And you think, I should be able to quit this or that on my own. Never mind the abundance of evidence that almost no one is able to quit bad habits or addictions on their own. Everyone does better when I have someone to help me on the way. One of the very best things I learned from my physical therapist when I was in treatment for this Achilles injury that I suffered was how to focus on what I could do, what I needed to do, where I wanted to get to, and forget about all the imaginary things that I thought I should be able to do. The injury had damaged me. Whatever I thought I should be able to do now was a pointless exercise in self-flagellation. Deal with what is real, deal with where I really am, get with the program of growing up and getting well. Stop making excuses for where you are. Stop pretending that you're something you're not. Find someone who will walk with you through the rehab, through the learning, through the getting better, through the whatever it is you have to do, and move ahead. If your faith is too little, the only way to fix that is to start building it by walking with Jesus from wherever you are now to wherever He's going, day by day. All right, it's a little tangent there, but back to our passage. I'm not really sorry because I think someone needed to hear that. So the disciples' reaction to Jesus' miracle of calming the storm tells us a lot about what Matthew wanted his readers to realize when they heard this story. They'd seen Jesus perform astounding miracles of healing, the disciples. They knew without a doubt that He could heal people, that He was a prophet. They probably knew that He was the Messiah. It's a very different thing to see someone command the wind and the waves to be still and watch that happen in an instant right in front of you as a consequence of His command. When they thought later about what had happened on that day, or maybe even while it was happening, the disciples would have recalled passages from the Scriptures like the one we read from Psalm 89, where God stilled the waves of the surging sea. Or from Job 38, where God says to the sea, "Thus far shall your proud waves go, and no further." Elsewhere in the Old Testament, God is the one who commands the seas, who sends out the winds, the one who rides on the storm clouds. It is God who commands the forces of nature. So who was this in the boat with them? What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey Him. When he wrote this gospel, Matthew now knew the answer to that question. He wants his readers and us to know what he and the rest of those who were in the boat that day had come to know, that the one who commanded his followers to go to the other side of the lake in a boat was the one who commanded the wind and the waves. He was the Lord of nature, the Creator God Himself, come to us in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. If we understand that Jesus is the Lord of nature, then we're not shocked or bothered when we read accounts in the New Testament of miracles like this one, where Jesus exercised His authority over nature. Most of his miracles involved using his power to help people, healing the sick, cleansing lepers, delivering someone from demonic oppression. Occasionally, Jesus needed to show people or spirits who he was. He didn't do miracles to put on a spectacle or to amaze the crowds. He used miracles to demonstrate that the kingdom of God was breaking into history in himself and through his ministry. And that's why the Gospels are filled with accounts of his miracles. They are not written there to entertain or to fool people. The Gospels record Jesus' miracles so that those who read them can know what the disciples witnessed, the inbreaking of God's kingdom in power, power which Jesus wielded right before their eyes, the testimony to who he was. The miracles testify to those who have ears to hear that Jesus is the Lord of creation, worthy of our allegiance, worthy of our worship. There's another reason that the accounts of these miracles are included in the Gospels. It goes back to something we saw last week. Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The same one who was Lord of nature then is Lord of nature now. His status hasn't changed. His power hasn't diminished. His purposes have not shifted. He still works miracles today. Most of the time, he uses miraculous power to help people, heal those who are sick, to set captives free from addictions, to deliver someone from demonic oppression. Occasionally, he needs to show a person or spirits who he is. And that can happen with a powerful miracle that could involve something as dramatic as stilling a storm. Just because you or I have not seen such a miracle right in front of us does not mean that they are not happening in the world. They are. Just because Jesus still works miracles doesn't mean that he will show you a miracle if you ask to see one, because he still doesn't put his power on display for spectacles, for entertainment, or to satisfy our curiosity. But if you're in need of rescue, you can always call on him for help. No matter how small your faith is or how lacking. And if you need a miracle, he is well capable of providing one. Even if you can't prove it actually was a miracle.